So, good afternoon once again, and welcome to our Wednesday Bible study here at Longmont Church of Christ. We are looking forward to continuing our study of Hebrews with you over the next few weeks and months. And let me just say first, if you're listening to this is probably the first time we've announced this publicly. And so you'll see bulletin articles about this or information about this, and we'll try to get this out on Sunday. But currently, the elders have plans for us to begin Wednesday night Bible class once again on October 7th. And so if you are watching in on this recording, don't fear. We're going to continue to record Wednesday nights. We're also going to live stream Wednesday night. And behind the camera at this very moment is Austin. Austin, kind of poke your head. Well, yeah. But there we go. So Austin is operating the camera as we speak. And if you remember, Austin has come on board as our new digital media specialist / communications minister. And so he's going to be helping me on Wednesday nights. So as we live stream, he's going to be, for all of those that stay home and watch the live stream, he's going to be your voice in the classroom. And so if you would like to make a comment or have a question during the Bible class, you'll be able to type that right into the Facebook page, and then he'll be monitoring that page and sitting there in class, and then he'll be able to make your comment almost instantly, and we can go from there. And so we are excited because we're hoping that's going to allow some of you who are at home and engaged with us through this video type operation to be able to be involved in the class. And so, we're going to start very slowly. We're going to start Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. We will have no children's Bible classes yet. So keep that in mind, that we're only starting with an adult Bible class at 7. Jimmy will be combining the youth class into that same time period at 7 p.m. And so that's a little bit of a change for the youth class, which I believe has been going on at 6 p.m. So he will migrate to the 7 p.m. slot also. But otherwise, we're not going to have any other kind of classes here at the beginning. And so, as always, we'll build through this over the coming weeks. But I think it'll be an opportunity for those who are used to coming and are able to come on Wednesday nights to join us once again in a as usual, a little more relaxed setting. But we'll still, of course, be wearing our mask during the entire class. We will not really have any singing, but it'll be an opportunity for us just to have a little bit of, with social distancing in mind, have a little bit of study of the Bible. And I'm looking really very much forward to it because I'll be able to keep going in the book of Hebrews, but we'll actually have people in the audience, and we'll be able to converse and talk through some of these issues that occur and some of these major teachings that occur in the book. And so I'm looking forward to that. And if you are going to stay home, fully understand, of course. And this is a Wednesday night at 7 p.m. And if you're listening in, we will still be recording, and we will still be putting that out on the website. Just bear in mind that we're going to record at 7 p.m. each Wednesday night, and then at 8 p.m. we'll be finished, and then so it'll be live streamed during that slot, and then sometime the next morning, Austin will be putting that into a recorded video for the online portion. And so you should be able to watch the recording sometime Thursday morning, and so Thursday night for those that will be continuing to watch the recording. And so we will attempt, though, to record comments that are made and share a mic so that you'll be able to hear those comments as you watch the recording or listen to the recording on that Thursday. And so we appreciate Austin's willingness to jump in here and be involved in this, though. And I think after a few weeks of working out the kinks and just making sure it all works properly, I'm excited about that also. And so even if we only have 5 or 6 come in attendance on a Wednesday night, still it'll be a little bit of an audience. And so I think back to the very beginning when we were doing this back in April, and we began by just standing at the small podium in the auditorium and recording the Bible class, and we actually even brought in some mannequins from CPR class and kind of set them out there just to give a focus point. And it's like, that's not going to work. And so, and as usual, of course, Daryl named one of them Bruce. And so, Bruce, you were well represented there with one of the mannequins. But that's not the way Bruce usually is in Bible class. And so we quickly, of course, got rid of the mannequins. And so we do appreciate all of you. During Bible class, the feedback, the comments that are made are often some of the best things about a class. And so we look forward to getting back to that format on October 7th. And we will wear masks. We'll spread out across the auditorium, and we'll have the opportunity to study God's Word together. And speaking of God's Word, we are in Hebrews chapter 3 today, and we're going to be looking at this next concept of Jesus. And it's led in, he led into this concept of Jesus being our high priest by giving us 2 major points already. He said Jesus is superior because he is deity. And that's the foundation of the book. And then he said, but he was incarnated, right? He came to this earth and became flesh. And so he is also superior because he became a man, just like you and me. And so now it makes sense that we would pause for a moment in the book, and he would circle around to this concept of Jesus being our high priest. So remember, a high priest is a go-between between man and God. And so he's an intercessor. He speaks on behalf of God. He speaks on behalf of man to each of the parties. And so our go-between, our lawyer, our high priest is Jesus Christ, and he's superior in his priesthood because he's both God and man. So it makes sense he would go there next. And so what makes him so great at being a spokesman for God? Because he's God. What makes him so great to become a spokesman for us? Well, because he's one of us. And so it just makes perfect sense. And so chapter 2 ends with that concept of, therefore he had to be made like his brethren in all things, that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in things pertaining to God, to make satisfaction for the sins of the people. For since he himself was tempted in that which he has suffered, he is able to come to the aid of those who are tempted. And so he ends chapter 2 by saying he had to become a human, or he would never be able to represent us. And so what we saw in the last couple of lessons about Jesus' humanity, now we're going to cross over into this vital concept of Jesus being our high priest. And then, as we've said, he makes these big circles. By the time we get to chapter 4, verse 14, he's going to culminate this section in the high priesthood concept by talking once again about his humanity, about his, just what makes him so good at representing us to God. And so we'll circle back to that in next week's lesson. But first, I want to talk a little bit about what he introduces here in chapter 3. And that's the concept of Jesus being superior to the old law because he's superior to the person who gave us the old law, Moses. And so Moses, if you remember, is basically, he's the second most important person in the Jewish religion, isn't he? It's like after Abraham, Father Abraham, the father of the nation, the father of all the people, Moses would be the second most important person. And so the law came through Moses. And so if Jesus is going to be superior to that old religion, that old law, and if he is going to replace the old law, then he needs to be shown to be superior to the human that gave us the law, Moses. And so he's going to pause for a moment and make the case, or make the argument, that Moses was pretty special. Moses was not just any old follower of God, though being a follower of God is special. He actually led the people out of Egypt. He actually gave us the Mosaic law, right, that we sometimes call the Levitical law. And so this law that Moses went up to the mountain to, I mean, how many men have had the privilege of talking with God directly and seeing God and going up to God's mountain and being with God? And so Moses holds a special place, not only in the Jewish religion, but of course with us and with the Bible as a whole and with God. And so the Hebrew writer must deal with this fairly early, and we're in chapter 3, and it makes sense that after saying Jesus is deity and Jesus is a man, he's the perfect high priest, for him to say, you know what, he's better than even Moses. So let's just look at it quickly. Therefore, holy brethren, partakers of a heavenly calling, consider Jesus, the apostle and high priest of our confession. Now, he was faithful. Jesus was faithful to God, to the one who appointed him a high priest. And he's as faithful as Moses was in all of his house. So he starts making this comparison. And we're going to see a parallel concept, or parallel concepts, where Moses and Jesus are the same. And then we're going to see the contrast, where Jesus and Moses are different. And it's in those differences that the Hebrew writer says, let me explain why Jesus is superior to even Moses. And that's found within the contrast. And so a little bit about both, right? We'll work our way through both of these. And so verse 3, for he had been counted worthy of more glory than Moses, by just so much as the builder of the house has more honor than the house. Now, for every house is built by someone, but the builder of all things is God. Now Moses was faithful in all his house as a servant for a testimony of those things which were to be spoken later. But Christ was faithful as a son over his house, whose house we are, if we hold fast our confidence and the boast of our hope firm until the end. That's probably enough, because there's so much in those 6 short verses. And so let's talk a little bit at first about how Moses and Christ are the same. First of all, they were both appointed by God. God appoints the high priest. He told us what the regulations would be and how they would act and what they would be doing. And so both of them were appointed by God. Moses was appointed by God to be the leader of the Exodus, and Christ is appointed by God to be our high priest today. They were both faithful to God. Verse 2, he was faithful, just as Moses was faithful in all his house. These two men, Jesus and Moses, were both incredibly faithful to God. They were both sent by God on a mission. We could say they were both missionaries. They were both sent by God. Jesus was a missionary to the entire earth, and Moses was a missionary to God's people in Egypt. And both of them were sent by God to fulfill a mission, and they both fulfilled that mission. It's just important to remember some of these contrasts, right? I'll say this one as an example. Even in these where it's parallel, where we're getting the same concept, there's some slight and subtle differences, isn't there? Jesus is successful in his mission. He dies on a cross. He is resurrected. And now he leads many sons and daughters to God. And so how many? As many as the number of sand grains on the seashore. It's like Jesus is going to bring many, many children to God, to be in relationship with him forever. Whereas Moses, he was faithful and he was sent by God and he fulfilled his purpose. But, it's always, you always think back to, wow, out of the millions of Israelites that left Egypt, and out of the hundreds of thousands of families that left Egypt as adults, only 2 entered the promised land. Just 2 families, Joshua and Caleb. And so it's amazing to think, wow, Moses did his best, but even with all of his hard work, two families out of all the original adults that left Egypt end up going into the promised land. Of course, by then all the children, of course, have grown up, and so there's still hundreds of thousands of Israelites, but all of those people that died in the wilderness not able to cross over into the promised land. And so, but Moses was faithful. He did his part. Both Moses and Christ are related to to God's house. Both of them are a part of God's house, and that this is an important concept within this text, that it's like a house is being built, and it's God's house, and this leads us to just an important concept. They're both spokesmen for God, right? That's where we get that word prophet. So they were both priest and prophet. They both represented God, and they both spoke for God. And so there's that concept of Moses speaking for God to of course, primarily Pharaoh, and there's the concept of Jesus, of course, speaking to humanity on behalf of God. And so both of them were faithful, both were a part of God's house, both had major missions to accomplish, and both of them accomplished those missions. And so he really wants to build Moses up, because it's important for us to see that, however high Moses is, Jesus is even higher. And it doesn't take much to build Moses up in the eyes of the Jews, but it's important to remind all of us today, so far removed from Judaism and so far removed from Moses, that Moses is like, other than Abraham, he is the pinnacle, right? It's like, he's like George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, right? Rolled into one. Thomas Jefferson. I always think, wow, he's like Thomas Jefferson, who had the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, and George Washington, who led during the American Revolutionary War and was the first president. He's like both of those men combined. He could do both. It's like, and in the Jewish mind, that's exactly what he is. He birthed the nation out of Egypt, and he led us through, and he brought us the law, the Constitution of our people. And so you can't underestimate the importance of Moses, and that just lends to how much better even Jesus is, because Jesus is even better than Moses. And one of the ways the writer does that is in verse 5. So now we'll start this portion where he's giving a contrast between Moses. So what makes Jesus superior to Moses? And he starts by using this word, verse 5. Now Moses was faithful in all his house as a servant. And that word servant, again, it's pretty special. This isn't deaconos, or like slave, or like just any servant. This is therapon, the Greek word therapon. And if you remember, that word in chapter 3, verse 5 is one of the reasons why I believe Hebrews is actually written by Luke, who was a doctor, because that Greek word therapon is the highly specialized nurse that stands right next to the surgeon and can pretty much do the surgery herself, because she's watched it happen 1,000 times, and she knows exactly what instrument he's going to ask for next, and she's got it ready. She knows that after the scalpel he's going to do this, and she's got that instrument ready. And she knows he's going to expect, the oxygen levels to be checked, or whatever it is, and she's already ready with the answer as soon as the doctor asks. It's that highly skilled assistant That's the word servant in this text. And who would use that kind of word? Well, a doctor would. And so that's what makes me think this was written by Luke, of course, and not by Paul. One of the reasons. But nevertheless, whoever wrote this book uses that medical term for, it's like he's saying Moses was faithful in all his house as a highly skilled servant. And so Moses was like the head of the servants in the household. It's like he's like number one servant. And so he's just building Moses up and putting Moses where he belongs. He really did do that, right? As he led the people of Israel out of Egypt. For we are a testimony of those things which were to be spoken later. But Christ was faithful as a son. And it doesn't matter how unique and special the head of the household servant staff are, they're not going to inherit the house. They're not the son. And so it's just very easy to see, oh, yeah, Jesus isn't just a highly skilled servant. He's actually God's son. So that begins this contrast. What else makes Jesus superior? Well, Moses was in God's house. The son is over God's house. So Moses worked in the house. Jesus built the house. And so that makes a difference, doesn't it? It's like, who is superior? For all that Moses did, for all the greatness of Moses and all of the sacrifice and service that Moses offered, it really doesn't compare to the one who's over the house. What else is listed here? Moses was a man, for he has been counted worthy of more glory than Moses. And so Moses was a man, Jesus is eternal God. So that always makes him superior. Moses witnessed to Christ. Verse 5, he was a testimony of those things which were to be spoken later. So Moses prophesied that someday there would be someone who would come after him, who would be a prophet like him. So Moses witnessed to Christ. And Christ was witnessed to by Moses, which makes him superior. It's like Christ was talked about by Moses. Moses talked about Christ. And Moses talked about Christ. And so there's that superiority of the one that's being talked about. Moses, of course, began a physical exodus. How did he begin that physical exodus? He began that physical exodus the night before by having the Passover lamb. Jesus began our exodus, the spiritual exodus, on the day that he was crucified as the Passover lamb. That would be on the cross. So the Exodus journey for spiritual Exodus times for us today began the day Jesus dies on the cross as the Passover lamb. For Moses, it was a physical Exodus. They were leaving the next day. And of course, what makes Jesus superior? It's a spiritual Exodus. Because this leads to eternity and not just the Canaan land, right? Not just to a physical land. And finally, of course, that's the final part that's mentioned here. Moses was faithful, and that word is repeated over and over and over, by the way. And so if you're looking for the key word in this section, it would be faithfulness. It would be verse 2, Moses was faithful. Verse 5, now Moses was faithful. So that is repeated over and over and over. But then verse 6, Christ is faithful. So Moses led people to their earthly reward. Jesus leads us to our heavenly reward. And that makes him superior. Now I'm going to end with this last thought. And it's found in verse 6. And so listen carefully to this, because this sometimes we pass over it. Because we're wrapped up in the high priesthood of Jesus and his superiority over Moses. And if we're not careful, we'll miss a little side point that I'd like to just share at this point in our study, and that's in verse 6. So I'll read verse 5. Now Moses was faithful in all his house as a servant for a testimony of those things which were to be spoken later. But Christ was faithful as a son. So what kind of son is he? He's a faithful son. He's faithful to the house, and he's over that house, whose house we are. So now we get a clue on what this house is that was being built. It's God's people. It's the church. And so Moses was a part of that house. He was a part of God's people. And he was faithful in his duties to the house. But Jesus is over his house. And we know that's true from Ephesus, of course. From Ephesians, that Jesus is head of the church. And so, but that's not the little tidbit I want to remind us of. It's coming up next in the text. So Jesus was faithful. Christ was faithful as a son over his house, whose house we are. So we are the church. We're part of God's people. If, and that's the word I want us to see, if. And then he says two things. So if you ever wonder, what is it about Christianity? What does God really want us to be like in his house, in his church? And we can go to places like Micah 6, right? 6 through 8, many of our favorite passages, right? What does he expect of you of man? Does he expect rivers of oil and to sacrifice your children? Of course not. He expects you to show kindness, seek justice, and walk humbly with your God. And so we go to those passages and go, okay, that gives us a clue how we need to be in God's house. But here is a great, overt, specific verse that says, are you in God's house? Well, let me tell you what it means to be faithful in God's house. Like Moses was faithful, like Christ is faithful. You too will be faithful. You will be considered a part of this house if you do two things. Number one, if you hold fast your courage. He's like, hold fast your courage. Keep your confidence. In other words, keep banking that God will make everything right in the end. That God's in charge, that the Son is faithful, that we, and this goes right along with our lesson from Sunday morning. What is he saying to Habakkuk? He's saying the just will be just by how? By faith. And so we are to hold fast. We are to remain confident. We're to take courage. Don't give up. Keep on keeping on. And then secondly, if we hold to the boast of our hope firm until the end, do you believe Jesus Christ is the only way to gain heaven, and you hold that to the very end? So simple thoughts, aren't they? But the Hebrew writer just reminds us that, if you're a Christian, if you're a part of the house, keep your courage. Stay confident. Remember who's in charge. Don't let this world and all the things that go on in it rob you of your confidence in God. And secondly, keep boasting about our way of heaven, the only way to heaven, to the very end of your life. It's like hold on to that hope that Jesus is the faithful Son who will take care of you. What a great message for us in this little short 6 verses of chapter 3 of Hebrews. And so I hope you're keeping your confidence and your courage up and continue to trust and hope in Jesus being the only way to heaven, and that we must continue to trust in him. And so thanks for listening today, and may God bless you as you serve him this week within his house. Thanks.